Hello, and welcome to Adelaide and Procter, Victorian Poetry, Faith and Fundraising. I'm Amanda Vernon.
And I'm Elizabeth Ludlow. In this episode on activism, charity, and fundraising, we're delighted to bring to you our conversations with Maria O'Donoghue, who's the head of community and events at Providence Row Charity in London, and Lesa Scholl, an expert on Procter. After concluding our conversation with Maria, we'll introduce more of Lisa's contributions.
Maria, thank you so much for joining us today. Would you mind introducing yourself for our listeners, please?
Thank you very much for having me, Amanda and Lizzie. My name is Maria O'Donoghue. I am the head of community and events at the Providence Row Charity.
Lovely. And can you tell us a little bit about your work at Providence Row and the work of the charity more broadly?
Sure, of course I can. So the work for myself under community and events is very much to get the word of Providence Row out into the community. When I say that, it is everything from our primary schools, our secondary schools, to our universities, to the community groups in East London, to our faith groups. It's a very big part of what we do. Another element of community would also be the local businesses in the community and where we work. And through the events forum that I would put on awareness events, but also events that raise money for the charity. It's a new role, really, the community facing one. Even though we've been around for quite a while, we're not really well known. And therefore, this is my remit now to make sure that we can get the work that we have done for centuries and currently do and for the seeable future. So that's what I do. With regards to Providence Row as a whole, it's simply a fantastic charity, and I don't think there is another one quite like us. We were founded in 1860 by Father named Father Daniel Gilbert at St. Mary Moorfields Catholic Church. He was coming back from a night call to see somebody who was unfortunately passing, and he had gone to give them the rites. And on his way back, he came across a destitute lady. At that time in East London, there was really nothing or no place to go other than the workhouse, and unfortunately within the workhouse, as we know historically, people very rarely came back out from it. So with the help of the Sisters of Mercy, who came from Wexford in Ireland, they set up Providence Row in 1860, as I said, a charity that is steeped in ensuring that the most marginalised people in society are looked after. We ensure that we see the individual and use our core values of compassion, respect, inclusiveness, empowerment, and justice. Now, I can reel them off because it's what we do every single day in the way that we work with our funders, the way we work with our clients, and through the services that we offer. We have many integrated services within Providence Row. So, for example, we would have crisis support, advice and recovery, learning and training programs, outreach psychotherapy. We have reset drug and alcohol support. We also have roots to roots hospital discharge. So when a homeless person finds themselves needing care in a hospital, we will work with the two local hospitals to us to ensure that they are discharged into accommodation, obviously in order to help them to recover, but also to set them on the path so that they don't find themselves, unfortunately, back in that position. We have our food program, our Welcome Area and Resource Centre. We have so many elements to what we do, but it's all centered around the individual, and it's all centered around one client. We focus on them with never a broad brush because everybody's story is unique to them.
Yeah, thank you. That's fascinating. And I think that the story you told about Father Daniel Gilbert on his way back, noticing that need, resonates a lot in Procter's poetry. She talks about the prayer and then walking through the East End and noticing the homeless and noticing those people and the individual care there. So just to explain to listeners, Father Daniel Gilbert was actually Procter's confessor and how she was involved in Providence Row in the first place. And in the introduction to a chaplet of verses that she wrote to raise money for the charity, she describes how there were initially 14 beds and several months later 31 beds. But she talks about how the demand is always much bigger. And I'm imagining that's something that resonates today with so much charity work. Can you talk about the challenges the charity faces today and the challenges that it's faced in the years since it was founded.
Absolutely. To this present day, I think one of the biggest things we, along with many other charities, is lack of recourse to public funding, shall we say, government funding, council funding, etc. Therefore, the funding that is being offered isn't really fit for purpose in terms of the numbers that we are dealing with. And the path we wish to put the client onto. That is a very, very big thing. Some charities haven't had their statutory package upgraded in 10 years, even though we have had COVID, the cost of living crisis, and the food costs have inherently, even, what I think it's 27% within the last 12 months. But being in the charity world at the moment, it is tough. And our work is needed. It is needed very, very much so. We can see by when we go onto our streets, we see a lot of homeless, and there is many varying and very different stories as to why that individual may find themselves in that predicament.
You talked about raising awareness among faith groups earlier, and I wonder if you can say a little bit about the Catholic ethos or the Catholic Foundation, how that's continued with the charity.
Absolutely. It does help that I'm a Catholic myself, so I very much resonate with the teachings of Father Daniel, but also on the way that the Sisters of Mercy conducted their wonderful, wonderful service for over a century. They came in 1860, and I think the last sisters was stopped working in the mid 1990s. And through all of that, the teachings of the church have always said to us is to look after one another. At every corner. We are each other's helpers. And in order to live a good life, and not just a Catholic life, but a good life, it is to see the good in people and where we can do the very best in that situation. The sisters, very much so, they were so full of dignity, offered so much respect. They were such a wonderful healing hand to many, many families, men, women, and children, that over the centuries, the only alternative to Providence Row back in 1865 to let's say up until the 1920s was the workhouse. Providence Row was the only entity in London where it took in man, woman, and child. And even though within the premises, we would have a men's section and a female section, and the children stayed with the mom, it allowed for the gentlemen to go out to seek work in the morning. The sisters also set up a school so that the children received free education as well. And during that time, the mother would be able to learn new skills or to earn some money within the refuge by participating in the food area or within the laundry, etc. So there was always a holistic view to how we wanted to treat people with dignity and respect and to get them back up onto their feet, but whilst in doing so, to give them the tools of the trade for going forward in their lives.
That's really interesting and really does resonate with Procter's work, trying to get women into work.
We can understand from looking at her work why she chose Providence Row to capitalize from the wonderful work that she published and we therefore benefited from, but also seeing how she was treated growing up. She was treated so well, in terms of that she was looked as a respected poet, and she wanted to ensure that she contributed to society and how she had been taught. And that's very evident in terms of the work that she did as a Catholic or as a Christian.
How big are you now? How many people are able to be at Providence Row?
In terms of clients, last year we helped over 1,200 clients.
Wow.
In our centre, and that would be through coming to our welcome area and resource centre where you were greeted by one of our colleagues, assessed as to what you would like or what you would need, whether that be something to eat or a shower or put on the path to recovery, whether it's addiction, etc. But always at their own pace, always at their own pace. We don't push people into something. We take them on a journey, very much.
Yeah. Fantastic.
I was reading about your peer mentoring scheme on your website, which sounds really interesting. And what you said before about the communal aspect to supporting the people at Providence Row. And I wondered if you could say a little bit more about the peer mentoring scheme and that sort of being alongside somebody rather than the paternalistic aspect of fundraising.
The peer mentoring is such a wonderful thing to be able to do. And again, it's based upon a client who has lived experience of homelessness or lived experience of any of the elements of which the services of which we offer. So one of the things what we do is that when our client has graduated to a place where they feel fantastic, they're back up on their feet and they're willing and wanting to give back to society or to give back to the charity that has helped them. We teach them various training courses so that they are ready and able, again, of bringing that person on a journey to a place where they can give back. So they would support trainees in our trainee schemes. So our trainee schemes would be our catering schemes in the kitchen and then also our horticultural upstairs. So if they have done it before and have graduated, they will go on that course with them as one of their advisors and be able to show them the way of how they achieved their success. They will also run activity and group sessions. So we will have our clients in a group to sit down and possibly discuss about various different things. And that client who has graduated will be able to facilitate that because it's sort of more meaningful discussion for the clients in that cohort to look to somebody who has come out the other end, should we say.
Brilliant. Thank you. If listeners want to get involved in Providence Row or find out more, where would you direct them to?
It would be wonderful to have you. Please direct your inquiries to get involved, all one word, at providencerow.org.uk.
Lesa Scholl has a really moving story to tell us about how she came to write her book, Hunger, Poetry and the Oxford Movement, a book that came out with Bloomsbury in 2020 and includes particular discussion of Procter. She thinks about Procter in the context of the social conscience and social work of the Oxford Movement. And before we go on, I just want to explain what the Oxford Movement was. So the Oxford Movement was a group of high Anglicans who sought to incorporate Catholic traditions of the Church of England into their worship, into their thinking and into their writing. And Procter was involved in high Anglicanism and in these circles before her conversion to Roman Catholicism and after it. So she converted in her 20s. We talked a bit about that in the previous episode with Emma Mason. Here's Lesa describing how she came to write this book.
The way this book came about was really quite personal. I was in Exeter doing research for my previous book on hunger movements in early Victorian literature. And I was writing away feeling quite, in many ways, self-righteous about the ideas of hunger, poverty, and what people should have been doing. And then one day I was coming out of Tesco and there was a young homeless man sitting on the side of the street. I gave him a packet of bagels, blueberry bagels. I remember that. And for that moment, I felt really proud of myself. But then I became increasingly dissatisfied with my response. I mean, what did I really do to help this young man? I maybe helped him for a moment. And so the next book project, which ended up being Hunger, Poetry and the Oxford Movement, came out of that moment. I wanted to think about how can we, who are not the hungry, respond appropriately or adequately to hunger. And so I found as I started to look at a lot of the poetry of the time, a lot of the people whose poems drew me in had been influenced by the Anglo-Catholic movement, one of them being Adelaide Procter. I've become quite fascinated by her work in general because she was one of those figures who was able to combine really strongly her literary skill and profession with her very deep religious convictions and her conviction that that religion should be active. So she's quite inspiring in that she was working very prominently within the poor communities of London.
In this final part of the episode, we'll hear a bit more from Lesa about two of Procter's poems, The Cradle Song of the Poor and Give. We are linking both of these poems in the show notes so you can read them in full. And unfortunately, we had a little bit of audio recording trouble during Lesa's interview, so the sound isn't fantastic. So we apologize for that, but hopefully you will enjoy it anyway. Just before we bring you our conversation on Cradle Song, I'm going to read out the fourth of 5 verses to give you a sense of the emotion Procter conveys here as she apostrophizes the words of a mother living in desperate poverty. I am wasted, dear, with hunger, and my brain is all oppressed. I have scarcely strength to press thee, wan and feeble, to my breast. Patience, baby, God will help us. Death will come to thee and me. He will take us to his heaven, where no want or pain can be. Sleep, my darling, thou art weary. God is good, but life is dreary.
I've been going over this poem today and it's increasingly disturbing and upsetting. I actually don't read a hope in heaven in this poem. Every time the mother is beckoning her child to sleep, sleep is a common euphemism for death. And for the mother, for the child, the mother's love for the child, in that absolute desperation, she wants her child to die because she doesn't want her child to experience what she is experiencing. So there is multiple guilt in the mother's expression. There's the guilt of bringing a child into this world, the guilt of not being able to provide for the child. On top of that, the guilt of wanting the child to die so the child could be free from it. And so in it, I'm really seeing death, yes, as an escape, but the sense of a heaven, it seems very empty to me. When she says, "He will take us to his heaven where no want or pain can be," it seems almost thrown away while it's positioned within these images of death. It's death where the hope is.
You talk in your book about this poem being in Dickens's journal, Household Words, and you think about how if we read it in that context in Household Words, the poem is situated in London. We've got the words through the poem of the thunder of a city. And I just wonder if you can say a little bit more or explain why you see this as describing a London scene particularly.
When I talk about the radical positioning of the lyric within the journal in the 19th century, it creates the very tension, I think, that Adelaide Procter was aiming at. What you have is the lyric, which is designed to stand outside of time, being positioned very thoroughly in the here and now, because it is juxtaposed with the news and the stories of the day. Now, I wouldn't call Cradle Song of the Poor a typical lyric in that sense, and we probably don't have time to go into all of that. But in terms of positioning in household words, what I find really interesting about it is that the majority of the poem is embedded on the same page as an article called When London Was Little. And this article is talking about the progress of London and how it's developed. But at the same time, it ends with images of dire poverty. So, in a literary and artistic sense, Proctor's poem is positioned within London. And it's almost like a camera lens zooms inside the squalor of the accommodation that are gestured toward when the article talks about heaps of filth and rubbish. And so the camera lens zooms in on the human within that space. So in the article, humans aren't the focus. You've got the street, the fact that streets have been improved, street signs, but there is rubbish. There's a gesture towards humanity in that it talks about the perils of passing in certain streets at night. But really, there aren't human figures. Doctor makes us look at one of those human figures. And we also have the reference in that article to the Foundling Hospital. And so you see, well, is this the answer for this child rather than death? Although we also know from Dickens himself, Oliver Twist, although I'm not sure that the Foundling Hospital was really such a great solution. So we have that sense in that of this positioning of the poem physically as a piece of art within London. And it also gives that sense that if people are reading the journal through, they will have that image of London with them as they go on to Procter's poem.
Yeah, thank you. What listeners wouldn't have been able to pick up on is some of the capitalisation through this poem. So, for instance, Procter's capitalised the words want and fever through it. And that reminded me of the Christmas Carol and the figures of want through that which is set in London. And I wondered if you might say a little bit more about the poem and how the poem's working in that way, the effect of the rhymes, bringing these figures into that frame where they're seen as the centre rather than the forgotten.
True. So with want and fever, they become characters. They are given not so much human quality, but they do become almost sentient beings. And that's what the capitalization reflects. And I think that what's even more powerful in that is that, they are given, but the mother and child, the closest we get is in the final stanza, the reference to God's bright angel, which could be an allusion to, that baby could be God's angel. But that sense of identity, which is always linked to agency, is really critical. In terms of the rhyming and the use of couplets, it really does reflect that the epic tradition and the heroic nature of the mother, even as she is using that euphemism of sleep for death. I don't get the sense in this poem that we're looking toward infanticide. There is a sense that she is going to try to keep fighting even without hope. It's such a nuanced picture of poverty. If we think about the hope being more in death than in the visions of heaven, we have that sense when the child dies, the crying will stop, there will be one less mouth to feed. But I don't feel that the reader is permitted to judge the mother because the mother is remembering the blessing of birth and clearly loves the child. There's discomfort in the despair of love and the guilt that she feels. I think one of the most important aspects in terms of the structure is the direction of the voice, where most of the poem is the mother speaking very intimately to the child in her arms. In the last stanza, we have Proctor speaking and speaking outwards, and it's a call to the reader to do something and to hear this cry herself.
In the final part of this episode, we're including some discussion with Lesa about Procter's poem, Give. And before moving on to our conversation, I'll just read out the final verse of this poem. Give thy heart's best treasures, from fair nature learn. Give thy love, and ask not, wait not a return. And the more thou spendest from thy little store, with a double bounty, God will give thee more.
There are a few things in this poem. One of the things is that reference to thy little store. That needs to be contextualized. It's the perception of smallness that creates the fear, that fear that one can't afford to give. Because honestly, I think that most people have a giving, generous nature. In general, people would love to give and to help. What happens is that fear comes in. And that is what Procter is trying to address. So her faith in God's provision moderates that fear. She encourages people to give in the moment from people's present supply and trust that God will provide their daily bread the next day. And so that's where she's working at. We have this sense too with the hidden springs that this is miraculous, yet natural provision. The miracle is built into the structure of creation. In a similar sense, the rain, although the rain is more overtly present, like that you see the rain falling in a different way. So there are two different ways here of God's miraculous provision. However, in both of them, they are a part of the structure of nature. They are there, and so they will occur. The one thing, though, that Procter doesn't address in the poem was drought, but we'll save that for another day as well. One of the things that I really think that I was noticing when I was reading this through again today, the reference to the princely flowers and their rich fragrance spreading. I mean, this is a reference to consider the lilies of the field, but it's an extension of that parable because as much as that parable is about consider the lilies of the field, you'll be okay. God will provide for you because God provides for the lilies. Procter actually takes that a step further because she talks about the way those flowers are giving. They're giving through their fragrance, through their perfumes, which alludes again to the Bible through being the aroma of Christ. And then they're shedding from their beauty. And then she says, yet their lavish spending leaves them not in birth. And so she takes Christ's parable that step further to make it about giving out of that provision, which I think is really powerful.
Yeah, it's so powerful. I think lots of the language here reflects the language of Wordsworth, who knew Procter's father, Brian Procter, but it's taken in a whole new way. So Wordsworth's poems seem to have these epiphanies and this recognition of nature. And she takes this, but her focus is less on the individual experience and more on the community experience here. And I wonder if you've got any thoughts about the connection here between the language of romanticism and what Procter's doing with it to kind of forge this community for her readers. We talked about it before in terms of a care community among her readers.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Here we have nature giving abundantly in the absence of human giving. So I think there is that sense of even nature coming into this doctrine of giving, that this is the natural order.
Thanks for all your thoughts today, Lesa, and your rich readings of these poems for us. Just taking this forward for us, for you, for our listeners. I wonder if you've got any reflections on what we do with these poems, what we do with Procter today.
I think one thing we can do, and you don't have to be someone with a spiritual faith as such to do this, but I think that Proctor's works are worth meditating on in relation to our world today and to consider ways that we can take her message into our own lives and our own communities. The world that we're living in today is in many ways similar to what she lived in. There's a lot of instability. At the same time, we're overwhelmed with that instability and having a sense of what on earth can we do? And I think where we come to in that is like the lyric poem, being in the moment. If we can reflect and find something to do in that moment that can make a difference, that can connect with someone in that moment, we don't solve the whole problem. We take a step toward it.
In our discussion with Lesa, she talked about the particular work that poetry does with its expressiveness, the deep metaphors, the allusions, the beauty. And she reflected on how poetry is attempting to have multiple layers. It's not just intending to be linear, which is more what prose does. And we reflect on the power of poetry in our next episode with Josie Billington.
Yeah, we're really excited to bring you this episode with Josie, where Josie thinks about her work with the Reader charity and reading out poetry in the context of group readings. We bring to you her reflections on the power of poetry and our thoughts on how Procter might speak to us today.
The world, doesn't allow spaces for
thinking about existential issues, the narrative or the discourse of success or, utilitarianism, which
Right.
is, it doesn't allow for us to do that. Literature is one of the places that constantly does it, makes us think again about what's worthwhile. Thanks for listening, and do tune in again next week.